While the United States might be considered a land of opportunity, some areas of the country are rapidly dying. Right in the middle of the country, there is a small city known as Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and it's been on a quick decline over the past couple of decades, with the population decreasing more and more as the years go by. This video is going to cover why this city is dying so fast, as well as one thing the city can do to recover from it. Before we do get into the specifics, you might want to know how exactly Pine Bluff is on the decline. Well, primarily the city is dying in population and economy. Pine Bluff is quickly losing its position as the 10th largest city in the state, due to the fact that people keep leaving the city. According to the New York Times, the population dropped from 49,000 in 2010 to 41,000 in 2020. That's an entire 12% drop rate. Well, why is Pine Bluff dying so quickly, you might be asking yourself? Well, it actually all starts with the crime. Possibly one of the most obvious issues is that Pine Bluff faces a very large crime rate. In Pine Bluff, the crime index is 1 according to the NeighborhoodScout. Now, keep in mind that according to this system, 100 is the safest. In other words, this small town is among the most dangerous in the nation. Should you decide to visit, you will probably want to watch your back. In Pine Bluff, you have a 1 in 64 chance of being a victim to violent crime, and more specifically, the city has a notoriously high homicide rate. During October 2021, Pine Bluff had experienced a major shooting, which received a high amount of media coverage. This, along with other reports of criminal activity, deters new visitors and encourages existing residents to leave. But with such a high amount of crime, who can blame them? After hearing the crime Pine Bluff experiences, you might be wondering to yourself, well, why are the crime rates so high? Well, one big reason is the high level of poverty, which does cause people to resort to other means of income. About 100 years back, the city's economy was actually doing pretty well. Unfortunately, automations in agriculture and manufacture ended up taking a lot of those jobs away. Along with the direct issue of individuals not earning enough income, this had caused the city itself to basically fall apart. As more and more people stopped earning money through legal jobs, fewer people were paying taxes. And because of this, the city just never had enough income to properly upkeep it. The result? Now residents don't have sufficient housing, and they end up dealing with 70% of a poverty rate. In fact, it's gotten so bad that Pine Bluff has become one of the poorest cities in the entire US. If you're like me, you probably still have some questions. For example, well, now I know why the crime rates are high, but why is poverty taking over the city? I mean, most places have recovered from automation by now. And you may be right. You remember how I mentioned that the city used to be pretty well off? Well, beforehand, Pine Bluff was a prosperous city and equipped with a popular river port, booming cotton industry, and a good university. Unfortunately, the area experienced quite a few floods, which did destroy a ton of buildings and fields. To make matters even worse, issues with the economy, like the Great Depression, had ended up setting the small town way back. That already sounds pretty bad, but things do get even worse. The lack of upkeep from insufficient funding got so bad that buildings literally began to collapse. This gave the city international attention because what reporter doesn't like a good story? Unfortunately, this attention discouraged people from moving to Pine Bluff, further damaging the city. With even less people moving in, the local government ended up having very little taxpayer dollars with which to heavily impact schools. The poor education held students back and made them less likely to be employed. Of course, this drove up crime and started a vicious cycle of a dying economy. To make matters even worse than that, the city's government has made some wacky decisions. In 2016, for example, inmates were told to tear down houses that were not being used. This likely caused a lot of the current housing shortage. And because of this domino effect from poor infrastructure, the city of Pine Bluff went from riches to rags within just 100 years. Now, with all of these issues that Pine Bluff is facing, the city could appear to be a lost cause to many, but there's still very many ways for the town to recover. For instance, Pine Bluff has been seeing a rise in certain jobs in the area, like the healthcare and educational services. Both of these areas are not at risk for automation, which does mean that the jobs could serve as long-term solutions. At the same time, however, the process isn't going to be a cakewalk. To truly take advantage of the new industries, Pine Bluff is going to have to focus on higher educational levels of students. Unfortunately, this may pose as a challenge with a poor infrastructure. So as to compensate for the lack of taxpayer money, Pine Bluff could again use education to its advantage, particularly its historic landmarks. For instance, Pine Bluff does have a historical black college which may not only attract more students, if given media coverage, but also encourage visitors. The visitors would be paying to visit the areas for tourism, simulating the city's economy. The city could then easily segue into how the community has a strong need for funding, so that way, the residents can have a much more solid education and better career opportunities.